An apple a day is one of the most genuinely well-supported pieces of dietary advice around. The fiber, the polyphenols, the cardiovascular benefits, the evidence is solid. But where you buy your apples affects what you're actually getting. Government testing in the UK consistently finds pesticide residues on conventionally grown apples, more so than on almost any other fruit. That doesn't mean every apple from every supermarket is dangerous. But it does mean there are meaningful differences between retailers in terms of sourcing standards, testing transparency, and how much chemical residue ends up on the fruit in your bowl. Today I'm going through 11 UK retailers, being precise about what the actual evidence shows, not what the marketing says, and finishing with 2 sources that consistently do better than the rest. Asterisk 11. Spar operates on a franchise model. Unlike the major multiples, there is no centralized fresh produce sourcing across the chain. Each franchise owner sources independently, which means there are no uniform pesticide testing requirements, no consistent supplier auditing, and no batch traceability that applies across all stores. The practical consequence is unpredictability. The Expert Committee on Pesticide Residues in Food, the UK government body that conducts regular testing across retail, has flagged convenience store fruit for inconsistent residue levels in its published reports. Some samples come back clean, others show multiple residues on a single piece of fruit. Without centralized sourcing or mandatory testing, there's no systematic way to know which you're getting. Spar doesn't publish pesticide residue data. They don't have published reduction targets for their fresh produce. That's not unusual for a franchise convenience chain, but it does mean that compared to the major supermarkets, there's less accountability when results are poor. The honest picture, asterisk not necessarily worse than some supermarkets, but with no centralized quality control, there's no consistent standard to hold them to. If you're buying fruit regularly and care about residue levels, a retailer with traceable sourcing and published testing is a more reliable choice. Asterisk 10. One Stop is a Tesco-owned convenience format. The concern here isn't primarily pesticide residues, it's stock turnover and produce freshness. Small format convenience stores move significantly less produce than full-size supermarkets. Apples that sit in a display for longer are more likely to develop surface mold. And certain molds produce mycotoxins, compounds that form as a result of fungal growth and don't wash off or peel away cleanly. Food Standards Agency inspections have periodically flagged small format retailers for higher rates of produce past its visual prime. A bruised or soft apple isn't just cosmetically damaged. The tissue breakdown around bruising is where mold colonizes fastest. This isn't a scandal, it's a practical consequence of low turnover. But it's worth knowing that Tesco's rigorous stock rotation protocols at its main stores don't consistently extend to One Stop. The practical advice, asterisk if you buy apples from convenience stores, check them carefully before purchase. Soft spots, skin that gives under light pressure, or an off smell beneath the waxy coating are signs of decomposition that has already begun beneath the surface. Asterisk 9. Jack/Tesco Express Budget Range asterisk, the lowest price tier of apples in budget Tesco formats, previously sold under the Jack's brand, consistently appears at the higher end of residue findings in government testing. The Expert Committee on Pesticide Residues in Food has found that budget-tier fruit tends to carry higher rates of multi-residue contamination than mid-range or premium equivalents. This is not a coincidence. The orchards supplying the cheapest fruit are competing on cost, and cost competition in fruit growing generally means higher pesticide application rates, not lower ones. Budget apples are also typically lower-grade fruit, smaller, less uniform, sourced from orchards where cost per unit is the primary metric. That's not inherently dangerous, but it is a reliable indicator that growing conditions have been optimized for yield rather than chemical restraint. The people buying the cheapest apples are often those eating the most of them, families on tight budgets, pensioners on fixed incomes who have been told by their GP to eat more fruit. The volume of consumption makes the quality of the fruit more important, not less. The key point, Asterisk if apples are a daily staple for you or your family. Spending slightly more on a mid-range or certified product reduces residue exposure meaningfully. The government's own testing data consistently supports that conclusion. Asterisk 8. Aldi has built genuine consumer trust in the UK over the past decade, and on many product categories that trust is earned. Fresh produce is where the model creates specific pressures. Aldi sources aggressively on price. Fruit contracts are awarded competitively across European orchards, primarily in Poland, Italy, and Spain. The orchards that win those contracts on price are not typically the ones investing in reduced input growing methods. German consumer group testing and UK independent investigations have found that discount supermarket apples carry higher rates of multi-residue contamination compared to premium retailers. Organophosphate residues, a class of insecticide that affects the enzyme system regulating nerve signaling, have been detected on discount supermarket fruit in multiple rounds of government testing. The quantities found are within legal limits, but legal limits represent what's permitted, not what's optimal for regular consumption. The apples look fine. Cosmetically, they're often indistinguishable from products costing twice as much. That visual quality is partly a product of the chemical inputs that produce it. The balanced view. Aldi is not unusually dangerous, but their sourcing model prioritizes price in a way that is directly reflected in residue testing outcomes. For everyday eating, a small price premium elsewhere buys meaningfully cleaner fruit. Asterisk 7. Lidl. The same analysis that applies to Aldi applies here. Lidl operates an identical sourcing model. European orchards, aggressive price competition, volume-based contracts. EU food safety audits have documented higher pesticide application rates at the large-scale intensive operations that typically supply discount retailers. The economic logic is direct. Spray more, lose less crop to pests and disease, reduce the cost per unit, win the contract. Lidl's apple range looks comparable to premium supermarket produce. Varieties, packaging, and shelf presentation are similar. What differs is what happened in the orchard before the fruit was picked, the frequency of treatment, the number of active chemicals applied, and the gap between the final spray and harvest. Pectin, the soluble fiber that gives apples their cholesterol-lowering properties, is most concentrated in fruit grown under less intensive conditions with healthier soil biology. This is a genuine nutritional consideration, not just a residue concern. The honest summary, asterisk broadly comparable to Aldi. Better than some options on this list, worse than the retailers at the clean end. If you're eating apples primarily for health benefits, the sourcing model matters. Asterisk 6. Iceland's core business is frozen food, and the fresh produce section reflects that. The concern with Iceland apples is less about pesticide residues during growing and more about post-harvest treatment and extended storage. Iceland apples often carry extended shelf lives that indicate heavy post-harvest intervention. Wax coatings are standard practice across the industry, but the thickness and composition varies. Diphenylamine, a post-harvest treatment used to prevent browning during long cold storage, has been restricted in the EU due to concerns about carcinogenic breakdown products called nitrosamines. It remains permitted in the UK within set limits. The nutritional dimension is worth understanding clearly. An apple stored in controlled atmosphere conditions for several months is not nutritionally equivalent to recently harvested fruit. Vitamin C degrades steadily in storage. Antioxidant capacity diminishes over time. Polyphenol levels, the compounds responsible for many of apple's documented cardiovascular benefits, reduce with extended storage regardless of how well the apple is preserved cosmetically. If you're eating apples primarily for their nutritional value, the age of the fruit matters. Iceland's convenience-focused model is not optimized for fruit freshness. The practical note, asterisk for everyday health eating, a supermarket with faster stock turnover and cleaner post-harvest practices is a better choice than one where extended shelf life is the priority. Asterisk 5. Co-op asterisk the co-op's entire brand identity is built on ethical trading, community values, and doing things differently from the major corporate supermarkets. Fair trade coffee, responsible sourcing commitments, community dividend. The ethical credentials are prominent at every touch point. The conventional apple range is where that identity meets a harder question. Co-op sources its conventional fruit through the same large-scale supply chains as the other major supermarkets. The same growers, the same distributors, the same chemical protocols apply. What's particularly notable is the transparency gap. Waitrose publishes annual pesticide residue testing reports openly on its website. Marks & Spencer commits to published reduction targets. The Co-op, the brand most loudly associated with ethical trading, does not publish equivalent pesticide testing data for its fresh produce. That's a meaningful omission for a retailer whose competitive advantage is trust. Transparency costs something. It costs relationships with suppliers whose results don't look good, and it costs the willingness to be publicly accountable when numbers are disappointing. The Co-op's silence on this specific issue isn't an accident. The direct point, the ethical positioning is genuine in many areas of Co-op's business. Fresh produce pesticide transparency is not currently one of them. An ethical brand that won't publish its residue testing data is asking you to take its values on faith in an area where the evidence is publicly available. Asterisk 4. Morrisons works hard on fresh produce theater. The market stall style displays, wooden crates, handwritten price tags. The visual presentation of freshness is carefully constructed and genuinely appealing. The substance behind the theater is where questions arise. Morrisons has faced sustained criticism from food journalists and supply chain investigators for sourcing apples that have been stored in controlled atmosphere warehouses for up to 12 months. Before reaching retail shelves, controlled atmosphere storage, reduced oxygen, increased carbon dioxide and nitrogen prevents visible deterioration. The apple doesn't rot or shrink. But the nutritional content continues to decline through storage regardless. Vitamin C levels drop significantly over months of cold storage. Polyphenol and antioxidant levels diminish progressively. The apple in your fruit bowl may be cosmetically acceptable and nutritionally substantially depleted, compared to recently harvested fruit. This is not unique to Morrisons. Controlled atmosphere storage is industry-wide practice. But the combination of a strong fresh provenance narrative with extended storage periods is a tension worth naming clearly. The balanced view. Morrisons is not significantly worse on residues than comparable mid-range supermarkets. The more relevant concern is storage duration and the gap between the farm-fresh story and the warehouse reality. Asterisk 3. Tesco sells more apples than any other UK retailer. At that scale, their sourcing standards have a larger impact on what British consumers are eating than any other single buyer. Government residue testing has found pesticide traces on Tesco-supplied apples across multiple testing rounds. Before its EU ban, chlorpyrifos, a neurotoxic insecticide linked to developmental harm in children, was detected on Tesco-supplied apples. Tesco was selling it legally. The EU subsequently banned it because the evidence of harm was considered sufficiently serious. The UK has also now restricted its use. Tesco does have a pesticide reduction program, and they do publish some residue testing information. The concern is the gap between the scale of their purchasing power, which could drive meaningful change in growing practices across their supply chain, and the pace at which they've chosen to use it. A retailer that controls the largest grocery supply chain in Britain has the leverage to demand cleaner growing practices from every orchard it works with. The commercial decision about how aggressively to use that leverage is a choice, not a constraint. The measured assessment, Tesco is not doing nothing on pesticide reduction. But their residue testing record, and the case of chlorpyrifos specifically, suggests the pace of improvement hasn't matched the scale of the opportunity or the responsibility. Asterisk 2. Sainsbury's positions itself as the considered middle ground. Not budget, not luxury. The sensible choice for shoppers who care about quality without paying premium prices. Testing by the Expert Committee on Pesticide Residues in Food has found Sainsbury's stocked apples carrying residues of boscalid and pyraclostrobin, both fungicides that independent toxicology. research has classified as endocrine-disrupting compounds. Endocrine disruptors interfere with hormones signaling in the body, mimicking or blocking naturally occurring hormones. The concentrations found are within legal regulatory limits. The debate in toxicology and public health circles concerns whether those limits, set for individual compounds in isolation, adequately account for combined exposure to multiple endocrine-disrupting chemicals across diet and environment. That's a live scientific discussion, not settled consensus, but it's a reason why researchers continue to argue for lower limits than current regulations require. Sainsbury's visual quality is high. Their apples look excellent. That consistent cosmetic quality reflects significant post-harvest treatment and careful storage management, which is fine as far as it goes, but doesn't address what's on the skin. The honest picture, asterisk broadly comparable to Tesco. Better than the discount end of the market on some measures, but not delivering the clean sourcing standard that the mid-premium price point implies. Asterisk 1. Asda sells apples at volume at low margins to more British families than almost any other retailer. The model is straightforward. Price drives purchase, volume delivers profit. Pesticide Action Network, UK's regular monitoring of conventional UK supermarket produce, has consistently placed Asda-sourced apples among the products with higher multi-residue detection rates. Cocktails of several different chemical compounds on a single apple are a recurring finding in testing. Compounds that have been extensively tested individually, but whose combined effects have not been systematically assessed. Asda's supply chain is built around cost efficiency. The orchards that supply cheapest fruit in sufficient volume are, structurally, less likely to be the ones investing in integrated pest management or reduced input growing practices. That's not a conspiracy, it's the direct outcome of how the contracts are awarded. Asda generates substantial annual revenue. The investment required to meaningfully improve sourcing standards, demanding cleaner growing practices, funding independent testing, publishing results, is proportionally small. The commercial decision not to make that investment at the rate that would materially change residue outcomes is what the evidence reflects. The direct summary, asterisk the combination of volume sourcing, price-driven supply chain competition, and limited published testing transparency, makes Asda the retailer where the evidence most consistently points to higher residue risk. For regular apple eaters, this is worth knowing. Two sources worth trusting *Waitrose *Waitrose enforces some of the strictest pesticide reduction protocols of any UK supermarket. And critically, they publish the evidence. Their annual pesticide residue reports are publicly available, independently compiled, and show detection rates consistently below industry averages. They've proactively banned several active chemicals from their supply chain that other retailers on this list continue to permit. Their Dutchy organic range carries full Soil Association certification, the UK's most rigorous independent standard for organic produce. The transparency piece matters as much as the results. A retailer that publishes its testing data is accountable in a way that retailers who don't aren't. When the numbers look good and you can read them yourself, that's a meaningful difference from being asked to trust a brand on faith. Waitrose apples cost more. The price difference is buying real traceability, stricter growing standards, shorter supply chains, and published accountability. That's a reasonable value exchange for anyone who eats apples regularly and wants to know what's on them. Abel & Cole Abel & Cole delivers certified organic apples direct from small British farms. Every apple is Soil Association certified, zero synthetic pesticides, independently verified, not self-reported. The supply chain is fundamentally different from anything in the supermarket model. No controlled atmosphere warehousing measured in months. No anonymous continental orchards competing on price. Fruit typically arrives within days of picking, from farms whose names and locations you can look up. The difference is immediately sensible. The smell of recently harvested fruit is distinct from apples that have been in cold storage for months. The skin is imperfect, russeting, slight color variation, natural marks, because it grew outdoors in real weather without chemical cosmetic intervention. The flavor reflects that, denser, more complex, with the kind of sweetness and sharpness balance that storage destroys over time. The nutritional case for recently harvested organic fruit over cosmetically perfect long-stored conventional fruit is well supported by the evidence on polyphenol and antioxidant degradation during storage. Abel and Cole costs significantly more per apple than Asda. The comparison isn't quite like for like. You're comparing fruit harvested days ago from a named UK farm against fruit that may have been in controlled storage for the better part of a year. Whether that difference is worth the price is a personal decision, but it's worth making with accurate information about what you're actually comparing. The core takeaway from all of this is straightforward. Government testing consistently shows that conventional apple residue levels vary meaningfully by retailer, with discount and volume-focused supermarkets showing higher multi-residue detection rates than premium and organic sources. Storage duration affects nutritional quality independently of residue concerns. And transparency, a retailer that publishes its testing data, is the most reliable signal that a brand is genuinely accountable rather than just well-branded. You don't have to buy exclusively from Waitrose or Abel and Cole, but knowing where the evidence points is worth something when you're deciding where to spend your weekly fruit budget. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe to TruthCart UK for more evidence-based product analysis. No affiliate arrangements, no sponsored conclusions, just the data most retailers hope stays in the small print.